Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome to our Curious Amalgam. I'm Elyse Dorsey, and the title of today's episode is, Where Are All the Women Economists? Me Too Issues in Antitrust Economics. Demand for diverse economists has exploded in recent years, but the field remains largely dominated by white men. The issues begin early in the pipeline and continue on through the most senior levels of the profession as institutions and firms fail to recruit, retain, and promote women long-term. Even more concerningly, numerous female economists have recently come forward with appalling stories of abuse and predatory behavior committed by senior male economists. Econ Twitter erupted in late 2022 with such stories, including allegations against a recent Nobel Prize winner in economics, demonstrating just how pervasive these problems are. More than 5 years after the Me Too movement began a reckoning, where do things stand for female economists, and what can we do to create a more inclusive environment? In this episode, we'll speak with our guests, Paola Valenti and Kellie Kemp, about why it's difficult to find women economists today, why the antitrust community needs to promote more women economists, and tools for confronting gender discrimination and sexual misconduct. Joining me today is my co-host, Jana Seidl. Hey, Jana.
Hi, Elyse.
Hey, would you like to introduce our guests for today?
I would love to. We're very, very fortunate to have two wonderful guests today. So Paola Valenti, as you already mentioned, is a professor of professional practice at Columbia Business School, and she received the 2020 Presidential Award for Outstanding Teaching. Paola has also served as the chief economist in the Office of the New York State Attorney General and worked in economic consulting for several years. Welcome, Paola.
Thank you very much for having me here, Jana and Elyse.
And then our second guest, Kellie Kemp, is senior counsel at Uber. She previously worked in private practice and is currently co-chair of the ABA Antitrust Section's Women Connected Committee. Hi, Kellie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks so much for joining us all. We're recording this episode in March, which, as we all know, is Women's History Month. And we understand that you all have been working on a series of posts shedding light on issues of gender bias and abuse in the economics professions. So what first prompted you to tackle these issues?
Yeah, thank you. We are so honored to be here and to spread awareness about the lack of gender diversity and potential instances of abuse in economics. We have these issues in the legal profession and in antitrust specifically, but they also exist and they are potentially exacerbated across the economic space. As you mentioned in the introduction, the field is notoriously dominated by white men, and women have consistently been underrepresented throughout all levels of the hierarchy, whether academic or professionally. In the academic space in 2022, women accounted for only 34% of new doctorates, only 33% of assistant professorships, and only 26% of tenured associate professorships. Women are only 18% of full professors. Minority women who are at the intersection of two marginalized communities face even greater underrepresentation. In 2020, for example, minority women received only 3% of doctorates awarded to U.S. citizens, and the numbers are so minuscule at the levels of tenured associate and full professors that we don't even have full figures for them. Despite this, I think the legal profession doesn't have a lot of awareness of what is going on and the severity of gender imbalance in the economic space. Yet, there's an increasing demand from clients and from law firms to find diverse economic experts and to build diverse economic teams. But the profession just is not where clients would like it to be. So we, Paola and I, and other leaders of Women Connected and Diversity Advanced wanted to bring attention to this issue. As you mentioned, Jana, Paola and I have published a series of 3 mini articles. They are available on the section's communities website and also through the social media channels of Women Connected and Diversity Advanced. The article series explores this gender inequity in economics and why it might be happening, and perhaps even more importantly, what members of the legal and economic professions can do to right the imbalance.
Thanks, Kelly. That's a super helpful overview. And I think, like you said, it's really important work that you guys are doing. And part of why we're really happy to have you here today is, as lawyers, sometimes we can get, fixated on our own space and what's going on there and not necessarily know. I mean, some of those numbers you were citing were pretty striking. So Kelly, we understand Econ Twitter helped shed some light on how extensive gender bias and sexual misconduct still is in the econ profession. For those of us like myself who don't follow Econ Twitter, can you tell us a bit more of those discussions, what was going on there?
Yeah, a few of my friends in economics told me about this, and it also was something that I had no awareness of prior to last fall. So basically, hashtag Econ Twitter is a community on Twitter for users who tend to be economists, whether academic or professional, who tweet about economics. It's a forum for users to share their research, to discuss current events, to debate points of theory, and people can also share tips on basically just being in the profession, job notices, grant opportunities, how to thrive in academic hierarchy. In October of last year, a group of women economists on Econ Twitter began tweeting somewhat sporadically about abuse and harassment that they had experienced at the hands of their male colleagues and superiors. And the discussion quickly grew, overwhelming Econ Twitter for several days as more and more women began speaking out about their own experiences with sexual harassment and abuse in the economics profession. And many of these women explained that they were turning to Twitter to share their experiences because they felt that their experiences were not being taken seriously by the institutions where they worked or where they went to school. And Twitter became a forum for these women to share their stories and to shed light on the presence of sexual harassment and the serious gender disparity in the field. Through these conversations, it was alleged that Philip Dybvig, who's the most recent winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, has made unwelcome sexual advances by numerous female students. And he now faces a Title IX inquiry by the University of St. Louis, where he is tenured, as reported by Bloomberg. So Econ Twitter ended up being a forum for women to share allegations of abuse in a way that they did not feel that they had an opportunity to otherwise.
So that's a really interesting dynamic, and thanks for giving us that information. So it seems like the economics profession, perhaps more than many others, right, seems to have this deep intertwining between academia and then that outside professional world that we find ourselves in, and that appears to be contributing to and, even exacerbating gender bias issues that begin in academia. Can you tell us a bit about the problems that start in academia and how they translate beyond that ivory tower to that professional world that we're in?
Sure. As Kelly mentioned earlier, the economics profession has really struggled with underrepresentation of women for a very long time. Kelly gave some statistics, and you've heard that the share of women is very low. But what is most concerning is that the share declines further as women climb up the hierarchy. And in fact, this phenomenon is not limited to academia, but we see it in other organizations as well. And this phenomenon is known as the leaky pipeline. And it refers to the idea that women gradually leave the economics profession because they experience discrimination in promotion and compensation, they experience gender bias, lack of mentorship, sexual harassment, and so forth. Now, this pattern is disturbing in any field, but it's particularly concerning in economics because economics has a significant impact on public policy. And that means that the prevalence of men's voice in these important debates has implications that go far beyond academia. And moreover, gender imbalance in leadership positions continues the status quo, and therefore it reinforces stereotypes and biases in the profession.
That's, a really big problem that can affect the workplace and policy for a long period of time. And one striking thing we noticed in your posts was this 2019 study by the American Economic Association, which identified systemic concerns regarding gender bias and misconduct in the economics profession. Can you tell us some more about what that study found specifically?
The American Economic Association conducted a survey to gather information about the professional climate in economics. And among other things, the committee reported on women's experience of discrimination, both inside and outside of academia, behavioral changes that women adopted to avoid discrimination, and other experiences of exclusion and harassment. And the results of the survey indicate that female economists have a very different perception of the climate in the profession compared to men. In fact, they're much less likely to be satisfied and much more likely to have experienced discrimination. Now, of course, it's not surprising that women are more likely to experience gender discrimination, but the results of the survey show that they're also more likely to experience discrimination based on other factors, marital status, age, and research topics, for example. This discrimination manifests in different ways. As students, for example, women in economics are more likely to report unfair access to research assistantships and advisors. Once they work, economists in academia report discrimination in teaching assignments, funding, publishing decisions, and so forth. They are also more likely to report unfair treatment in promotion and compensation, but this is true both inside and outside of academia, and it's particularly true in for-profit organizations. Now, sadly, as we have talked earlier, women are also more likely to report having experienced sexual harassment. In the survey, 43% reported experiencing sexual harassment, and 23% stated that fellow economists had attempted to initiate a romantic or sexual relationship despite they had discouraged it. Now, what adds to the problem of discrimination is that a large share of women report changing their behavior in ways that are actually counterproductive to their career. For example, the survey indicates that 1 out of 4 female respondents did not apply or take certain employment positions to avoid unfair or discriminatory behavior.
Yeah, those are really troubling results. So what steps did the American Economic Association take in response to these findings, and have any of those proven to be effective so far?
Well, following the survey, both academic institutions and professional organizations have vowed to make changes, and something has been done. There have been some small but important changes. For example, during the annual meetings of the American Economic Association, where typically the job market candidates are first interviewed by potential employers, job interviews are no longer conducted in hotel rooms, which happened in the past and often made female candidates quite uncomfortable. During the last few years, within the same meetings, there have been several panel discussions on racism and sexism in the profession to raise awareness among economists of both genders. And the American Economic Association has also adopted a new code of conduct and put in place procedures for investigating violations and for punishing violators. It has also created a task force charged with addressing the profession's problem and with recruiting more women and people of color. Now, more could be done to diversify the profession's leadership. For example, economic departments could be graded on their diversity efforts, or leading journal could be required to have racial and gender diversity in their top positions, for example. So the problem of gender discrimination and sexual harassment definitely are not solved, but economists have become more willing to talk about it. And it seems that the profession is taking some steps. Hopefully these efforts will continue and will actually grow stronger so that we can finally see some results.
Yeah, I think, that's a really encouraging first step, even if we still have a long ways to go. And I think also a good segue, we wanted to turn specifically to antitrust economics because your post also noted a pretty staggering lack of female economists serving as testifying experts in merger trials. So can you talk to us a bit more about what those statistics look like?
Yes, it is a big problem. It's actually difficult to find gender data specific to antitrust economists or to litigation consultants. As far as we can tell, no comprehensive study has ever been conducted, but there is some research that we can look to get a sense of the problem. As you mentioned, there was a study conducted by Dr. Elizabeth Bailey, who found that women economists are rarely selected to be testifying experts at merger trial. From 2007 to 2020, only 5 of 23 merger trials in the United States had a woman economist testifying on behalf of the merging parties. Even worse, the US government selected a woman economist to testify on its behalf only once in the same 14-year period. There are holes that could be poked. Maybe, for example, more women economists were slated to be the testifying economic expert for mergers that were ultimately abandoned by the parties and therefore did not go to trial. If there was a way to collect this data and to assess it, I do think we would be unlikely to find that the gender statistics would be vastly different for the overall selection of economic experts across gender and minority groups.
Yeah, definitely. And, it certainly speaks to kind of the pipeline problem too, but can you talk to us a little bit about why it's a problem that so few women economists are selected for these roles?
Well, women make up half of the population, and they bring unique perspectives and experiences to the table. And so when women are not given equal opportunities, insights and ideas are not fully utilized. And this is a missed opportunity to increase the quality of legal decisions. And in addition, when women are not well represented in leadership positions, it can be difficult for young women to envision themselves in those roles. And in antitrust economics, being a testifying expert means being in a very noticeable role at the top of the hierarchy. And so having few women in this role can lead to a lack of confidence and a reluctance to pursue careers in this field.
I think that's a really good point. Even within the antitrust world, but also outside of it, a lot of times the testifying economic experts are given a lot of airtime in the world and kind of get a lot of clout, a lot of respect. They're talked about in ways that, the folks behind the scenes don't necessarily get that kind of credit. So I think can definitely be very troubling that, so few women are having access to that, important platform. And unfortunately, it seems like female economists today are pretty likely to encounter gender bias or sexual misconduct issues at some point during their academic or professional careers. So we wanted to talk to you too about, what tools exist today for women who are going through these issues.
Well, there are a few resources for women experiences discrimination and sexual misconduct. In academia, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 72 prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs and activities. And so employers and students of educational institution can file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights. Now, the problem with Title IX is that it's not always effective. And for example, while complainants have the right to an investigation, then it's up to the school to decide what disciplinary action to take, if any. And also, Title IX can only be applied when the accused and the accuser are in the same institution. And so it limits the extent to which it can be applied. A second resource for economists is the American Economic Association, which has a policy on harassment and discrimination. The policy calls for fair treatment for all economists and lists a series of unacceptable behaviors. And these include intimidation, threats, harassment, and unwanted emotional or physical intimacy. So women who have experienced conduct that potentially violates this policy can file a formal complaint with the American Economic Association secretary or president. And the individuals that violate this policy are subject to disciplinary action, such as removing the individual from the American Association activity, terminating the membership, and notifying the employer, and so forth. Kellie, maybe you want to say something about the ABA?
Yes, the American Bar Association also has a couple of tools that can be used. Of course, members of the ABA can include both lawyers and economists. The broad ABA, or the big ABA, as it's colloquially called, has a set of business conduct standards that prohibit discrimination, harassment, bullying, and intimidation. And members of the ABA who feel that the standards have been violated can report the conduct to the ABA Ethics Office or to a supervisor. The Antitrust section also has a conduct pledge, which was developed last year and has recently gone live. It requires participants of Antitrust section activities to create a respectful culture. And anybody participating in a section event who determines that these expectations were not met should contact the section's diversity officer, the section director, or any other section officer.
Thank you for that overview. So we've talked about Title IX and some of the difficulties that exist with that, pursuing policy violations of the American Economic Association, and then avenues available within the ABA, but that's once women have already experienced misconduct, right? So what other steps are there that we can take to affirmatively help prevent gender bias and sexual misconduct from arising in the first place?
Well, promoting gender equity requires a multidimensional approach. Economists in leadership positions that understand the experiences of underrepresented groups and value diversity can definitely create a culture that is welcoming and inclusive to all employees. For example, networking and mentorships are essential tools for career development. And women often face challenges in accessing these opportunities, especially in fields like economics that are male-dominated. And so providing networking opportunities and mentoring programs specifically for women can be highly effective in promoting gender equity. Female economists can also take advantage of communities such as the Committee on the Status of Women in the Economic Profession of the American Economic Association and the ABA Women Connected Committee. These communities provide flat platforms for networking and provide mentorship opportunities. Attending conferences and seminars that are focused on women in economics can also be a great way to build a network of contacts. And mentoring programs also can help provide guidance and support for women and address the lack of role models and support systems that women often face.
That sounds like a lot of really good options for folks to start or, enhance their participation in. And for those of us on the legal side of the world, as part of this multidimensional approach you mentioned, what can we help do to alleviate these kinds of issues that we're seeing on the economic side of the profession?
Legal practitioners have a critical role to play, whether as outside counsel, as in-house counsel, or as a government enforcer. Lawyers reinforce gender and racial inequality when we regularly select economic consultants and experts from the same small pool of well-known, well-established, generally white male economists. On the other hand, lawyers can catapult the careers of lesser known but equally competent women economists by selecting them to lead complex assessments and for other high-profile roles. And if lawyers play a role in selecting women economists, we can benefit the legal profession and our clients from making these kinds of decisions, because it will help us to change stale ways of thinking and approaching problems. And also, research shows, Paola explained a little bit about this, that diverse teams generally make their clients happier and earn a greater percentage of overall clients' legal spend. So if the antitrust and consumer protection community promote women economists, in particular by selecting women economists as lead experts, we can bring a lot of benefits to the profession and to enforcement policy.
Thank you so much, Kellie and Paola, for this really fascinating and important discussion this afternoon. I think I've learned a lot. Some of these statistics you cited are pretty upsetting, but hopefully we can make some good changes along the lines of what you just outlined, and we can make some real progress over the next few years. Before we let you go, we have a couple questions for both of you to help our audience get to know you both personally a little bit better. And the first question is, what advice do you have for young professionals just starting out in their careers? Paola, do you want to go first?
Sure. I would say never stop developing your own skills and expertise. Take advantage of training programs, professional development courses, because by doing that, you can position yourself as a valuable contributor to your organization, and you can be better equipped to take advantage of the opportunities when they arise.
My answer was actually almost the exact same as Paola's. Take advantage of any opportunity, no matter how small or uninteresting it might seem, whether it's pitching in on a big document review or helping another team, maybe, the employment law team with a big project that they're working on. You never know where your career will take you and what skills will benefit you in the future. And really, any project that you work on will have a learning opportunity or learning experience, and make sure that you're taking as much advantage of that at the beginning of your career and throughout.
Yeah, those are some great tips. I think that's really great for our listeners to keep in mind. And then if you could tell us something about yourselves that we wouldn't know if we only knew you professionally, to wrap up, that would be fantastic. Kellie, why don't you start this time?
Sure. Well, I love reading. I studied comparative literature in college. Might not be a very useful degree, but I still try to keep it up by reading regularly, including in Spanish. I studied literature in Spanish. So if you want any book recommendations or ever want to talk about a book, it is a topic that I love talking about.
That's really fun. I will definitely be reaching out. I think I have some suggestions that I would love to talk to you about. Paola?
Well, I'm a runner and I love running marathons. It's definitely my favorite distance. My dream is to get the 6-star medal, which is given to runners who complete the 6 world marathon majors: Boston, Chicago, New York, London, Berlin, and Tokyo. And so far I've run 2 of them. New York and Berlin, and I'm running the one in Chicago in October. So at that point, I'm only halfway. So hopefully I will succeed.
That's amazing.
Yes, that's so impressive. I recently ran the Disney Princess 5K, and that's the longest I've ever run. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for all of the effort that goes into that.
Oh, that's how you start. You start there, and then it's very quickly to become addicted to running.
Great. Well, again, thank you both so much for joining us today for this really excellent discussion. And thanks to everyone for listening. And we hope we tune in next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam. a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.